Baptist family, and I went to church 3 times every Sunday from the time I was 2.5 until I was 16, and I could never understand the parable of the talents, because I really didn't have a talent at all. Everyone at school, you know, they could sing, or they could write, or they could play the piano, or they could do something. They were good at mathematics. I hated those ones, absolutely, completely hated those. And I didn't really seem to have the talent at all. And it really wasn't until I was 19 years of age that I discovered it. I could remember the Latin names of plants. Now, it's a very strange talent to have, but it really is the only one I've got. And yesterday I was back in the very field in which I found that at Ravenstor Youth Hospital in Derbyshire, because I was opening a new, or reopening the Lytton Mill Field Centre. And there is a field there in which I was a lab boy, and I was out with all these students who come up from London carrying all the equipment, carrying the butterfly nets and things. And when I came back, I thought, yes, I can remember all those names, how strange. So I went out that evening, I walked through the field, which is now called Bellamy Meadow, believe it or not. And I walked through the field and I can still remember them. And that's it, I became a botanist, just like that overnight. Also, the young lady that I still married to 40 years on was there, so perhaps there was some mix in that all together. And I've been going around the world. In fact, I went around the world 6 times last year, all because I can remember the Latin names of plants. But thinking back, we have a date up here of 1635. You know, there was a lot more ways of expressing one's talents back in 1635. We think that we have new ways of expressing things with, you know, the web and the internet and things, but just think of the people there were in the countryside. There were farmers. Okay, there still are farmers, but not nearly as many of them. There were farmers' wives, and they thought that doing the job of being a farmer's wife and bringing up the kids and doing all the things they had to do around the farm was a very, very important and fulfilling job. There were farmers' families, and how many generations of farmers' families have sat in this church and made it a very, very sacred place, because they come here in sorrow, they come here in joy, they come here in happiness, and they come here to say thank you very much for the landscape round about here. And it was the richness of that landscape and the way that people looked after it that allowed this beautiful church to be built. And when I go across the world and I see some of the great churches and think how rich the landscape must have been when it allowed a group of local people, the families of local people, actually to turn around, have enough time, enough money, and enough wisdom to build things like this. We suddenly come and see the talents there were. What other talents were there? Well, there were certainly ploughmen, and there was hedge layers, there were ostlers, there were marshmen, there were blacksmiths, there were milkmaids, there were, and I think I like that one best of all, there were dry stone wall makers, because I live up on the Pennines where we can't grow hedges, and I do a bit of dry stone walling. Until I did, I was beginning to curl up with arthritis. I played rugby and broke just about every bone in both those arms playing rugby, and my nose. I don't get arthritis in my nose, but I do get arthritis in my fingers. And if I don't do anything, they curl up, and the pain is excruciating. So I go dry stone walling. And I tell you, when you built a metre of dry stone wall, you don't have arthritis anymore. The only place I've got arthritis is in that little finger there, and I can't get rid of it because I found no way to actually exercise that little finger. And, you know, all those talents, there were ways which people could express not only a talent, but find a job through the expression of that talent. And I think we have lost so much of it. And where are most of those people? And when I'm a Cockney, what I am really doing campaigning for the countryside, I don't know. The first countryside I ever saw was when Hitler knocked a few buildings down in London, and up came the wildflower. The first time I ever saw a kettle, with a kettle hawking in over a bomb site, which only a few months before had been, you know, the house of my friend. All these things. But as soon as the war came to an end, I got on my bike and cycled to Brighton, and I cycled through a landscape bursting with biodiversity, full of little hedgerows and wet bits and dry bits and big trees and small trees and things. And I suppose it was that built into me. But nobody ever told me that plants had Latin names until I met this strange college lecturer called, who, there I've forgotten her name. She's had a Latin name, I've actually named it. Now, why? What is that? And I used to sit at home when my granny was too ill to go to church anymore. I used to get left at home granny sitting, and we used to sing all our favourite hymns. It was pretty terrible, because as though sitting in the front of my hill, I got a pretty terrible voice. And I used to discuss this with her, and she couldn't give me the answer. And when your granny can't give you an answer, you really go into the rest of life wondering what that parable was all about. But I think I do know now, because if you have a talent, whatever that talent is, if you can't exercise it, you are sent into outer darkness, because there's something inside you trying to get out, and if it can't get out, if it doesn't have that expression, how can you go ahead? And I think the most important person in any rural landscape is actually the gamekeeper. Now, I learned all my ecology from gamekeepers. The first one was the Richard Jeffries type down in Sussex and Surrey, and he was amazing. And I said, how can you possibly shoot anything? And he showed me that you do actually have to shoot things. If you don't shoot things, then you get the whole countryside over killed. So I could never shoot anything myself, but I was very, very glad. And I had forgotten the name of that gamekeeper until I was opening a piece of woodland at the nature reserve down in Surrey for the Wildlife Trust. And it was a piece of woodland I used to work on as a youngster, actually helping to coppice that woodland for the local farmers so we didn't have to pay for our campsite. And a lady came up to me and she said, I hear you used to come here when, as a scout, and you were inspired by our gamekeeper, Mr. Bridle. Now, can you think of a better name for the gamekeeper than Mr. Bridle? I remember him leading his horse on, and as that memory came back, an enormous horse came through belonging to the Forest Commission, because we are using traditional methods for putting that landscape back into working. But it's not just in this country. I travel the world and I see some pretty awful things happening, terrible things. At this moment we are measuring the width of children's wrists in certain parts of Africa. And if they are wide enough, we give them food. If they're not wide enough, we let them die. How can we actually live in a world, which can condone these things actually happening? But it is basically being done. I became a campaigner, and shows you how really stupid I am. I was working in West Africa on phytosociology. I was trying to understand how vegetation is put together, why one plant is always found growing near another plant. Not the animals, you don't see that because the animals like coming and nicking all the energy from my plant, but why you get communities of plants. We call it biodiversity these days. And we couldn't identify a thing. I was a junior lecturer, and all the local kids used to come out from the village, and they knew the names of them. Why did they? Because they depended on me for everything they built, everything they ate, the way they lived. And they would say, this is such and such, and we'd look it up in the book and find out what the Latin name is, and wow, I was going to be a famous professor with an FRS one day. And then all of a sudden, our best identifier didn't turn up and said, what's happened to Bokeh? And I said, he died. And why did he die? And I went and I found out that these people usurped their own land, their forest heritage, and given jobs by aid. Oh yes, well, we'll grow cash crops on your land, we'll give you a job. About 1 in 10 of the people got a job. And the rest of them, what did they do? They had nothing, and they were dying of malnutrition. Now that was back in 1960, and I've been campaigning ever since. And I'm afraid the tropical rainforest is still falling ever faster. And I've been a really rotten campaigner. But I'm not going to end on a down note. I'm not going to end yet, but I'm not going to end on a down note, because I believe the green renaissance is beginning. And, it is strengthening right the way across the world. But let me just tell you of one place I'm working in quite a lot. When I first went diving in Indonesia, very much in the news at this moment, It was great. You'd go along and you'd anchor your boat just off a village, and all of them would come out in their dugout canoes and invite you into their village. You were immediately part of their village. And the best part of the day was at 5:30 every evening, all the kids would come and get you, and we'd go out fishing. Now, I can't go fishing because I don't like killing things. Tell them, what a hypocrite. He eats them, but he won't actually kill them himself. And so all the kids used to go out fishing, and out would come the freshest fish we never even dream about in this country, out of the sea. And then they would cook it on the beach with wood, with spices, and with fruit from their tropical rainforest. People living between the two most biodiverse systems on this earth. And it was absolutely fantastic. There's no fish left in this sea. There's 100 million people there facing starvation. I was on a picket line not very long ago in Jakarta, and I got blown off my feet by a water cannon. It used to be fun when I was young. It's hurt now. And when the student picked me up, and he said, you know where they make the water cannons, don't you, David? And I said, no. He said, England. And suddenly one begins to think about what this world is basically doing to itself. Now those people are simply campaigning because they can't go fishing anymore. They don't have any social security. So what do? You don't stand back and let your children starve. You do something about it. And really, everything, and when we get it reported in the media, we never get the actual basic truth reported about why these revolutionary lines. Okay, they've got a very, very corrupt government in there. If only the government had had the sense to not to allow the big fishing fleets in and the destruction of their native fisheries, those people wouldn't need any social security. They could feed themselves. And it really does worry me that still across this world, about 80% of all the people, all the human beings, 6 billion of them, 80% of those are still trying to live in rural communities and still trying to live on basically what was their land and their ways of life. But they are being sapped inexorably to make exactly the same mistakes we have made in the countryside here. It's like the high-rise hooligans who went down and built Torremolinos and started all those package holidays down on the Mediterranean. They didn't bother to put any infrastructure in or think about what they were doing. They really destroyed areas, and it's now taken, 30, 40 years now, vast amounts of money to start putting those coastlines back into working order. But those high-rise hooligans and the high-rise aid masters who are still pouring the wrong sort of aid into developing countries are still going on doing that, smashing more and more sustainable lifestyles up. So what we're discussing here is of immense importance. It's about a way of rural life where people live with their feet and their hearts and their families within the land. Another thing, I was listening to Classic FM on the way there. I have a grandson of 7. I have a wonderful adopted family, and my 7-year-old grandson is Afro-Caribbean. And Granddad tells terrible stories about their grandson, but you know, and he won't have anything else on the radio but Classic FM, which I think is pretty good. So I can always find it. I've got one of the push-button radios, and Theo's got it so every button comes into Classic FM. When he was 4, I took him down to London, you know, where Granddad grew up in London, and I showed him all my haunts, and then we were walking through Trafalgar Square, and he looked up and he said, Granddad, he said, is that Nelson Mandela? Which I thought was pretty good. I said, well, no, it's not. It's a very, very famous English admiral. And he said, but he's black, Granddad. And he looked up, he is black. Probably made some stone brought from some faraway place. And he's got a really big memorial up there, hasn't he? So, you see, that, people say, why do you carry on campaigning? You've been campaigning for 40 years. And I say I carry on campaigning because I want my grandson to be able to get on his bike and cycle down to Brighton and find all that biodiversity put back together. And that is a moderately simple thing to do. And that's exactly what Robin Page and this amazing trust stand for. Let's get some sense, let's get some sensibility back into the way we actually run our lives. About 2 years ago, I had a letter from Vanuatu. Now, Vanuatu used to be called the New Hebrides, a wonderful scatter of islands near the Solomons. I'd never been there. I'd always wanted to go there because it was the end of the migratory chain for people in the Pacific. They populated everyone else, and they came to this group of islands, which were so far away they weren't very biodiverse, because it would take the animals and plants an awful long time to migrate along to them. Some of them were new islands. But it is the most diverse, culturally diverse place on earth. There's only 300,000 people live on there. They speak 113 languages, some of which have 27 dialects. There used to be 1 million people there before we got there with a bad disease, and I'm afraid took Christianity there, because some of the things Christians made them do really did not gain their survival or allow them to go on living in their traditional way. But these people still are. And they asked me, the elders said, will I go to record all their funerary rites and all their custom rites? Because the youngsters don't want to run around naked anymore, and they don't want to live in the 20th century. They want to be part of the 21st century. So I went out last year and got enough money just to film 2 of their rites, and they were both in relation to 100 days after the funeral, and then a little later. And 100 days after the funeral, that was amazing, like where everyone, the body has been remodelled, and it's put in the most beautiful arbour built out of all the key plants within their forest. And there it is laid to rest, and there it rots back, and the forest basically grows up again. And then the second one was, I think, if you want spirituality, I always find spirituality when I come into a church. Because, not just because of the building, but because of everything that happened to people within this church. I said, why it's here? Because it's a celebration of the richness of the countryside, the richness of God's creation, the richness of people working, showing all their talents within the area. But the second celebration was when the spirits come back, and all these people dressed in wonderful spirit costumes and masks, all made out of spiders' webs, which they collect from the forest, and they build these amazing art work such as I've never seen before. And they come in and they warn the village, and they say, look, he had made his decision, he's either gone down the good road or the bad road. You can't bring him back, you can't change things, he's gone. You've got to get back and you've got to work with your land, you've got to plant the crops, you've got an awful lot of work to do. And they chastise them, and they all come in with the peachios, big strong bit down the middle of a banana leaf, and they then whack all the men. Now they're all stark completely naked, and if you get whacked around the bottom with the peachio or banana leaf, it doesn't hurt. So everyone jumps up and down. It's a phenomenal celebration of someone gone to heaven, and we are re-putting the earth back into working order. Very, very exciting. And just before that, I was invited by the ecumenical patriarch of the Greek Orthodox Church to go on a trip to celebrate the 1900th anniversary of the writing of the Apocalypse, the book of Revelation in the Bible. And it was quite phenomenal to go. We had all the 10 bishops, and we were on a boat, and we went from Piraeus to Istanbul, and then to Ephesus, and then down to Patmos. And we had 100 ecologists and 100 theologians on the voyage, and we were trying to learn and understand what has gone wrong, this relationship between people and the creative power and the creative influence of God. And of course, in a great service which lasted 4 hours, and I had to wear a suit, a black suit, and I very, very rare he laughed, and I've never seen him at the time before. Sitting there and having for 7 days discussed the thing about the fact that the apocalypse wasn't the end, it was the actual beginning, it was a renewal of the earth. And perhaps that's exactly the position we're in at the moment. Perhaps we have destroyed so much that we are now moving into that apocalyptic phase when we've got to find the strength, the will and the know-how to actually put the world back into working order. And then, only last November, the Greek Orthodox Church also ran the most fantastic trip all the way around the Black Sea to actually look at the Black Sea and understand its ecology. The Black Sea, the most polluted sea in the world, it died, but it actually only died, and it really did die. All the fish went. It was one of the richest fisheries in the whole world. In fact, 5 civilizations around the Mediterranean depended upon those fisheries. Jason and the Argonauts, they went through the clashing rock, this amazing sea, some of the richest fisheries on this earth, and it provided them with it. And I didn't know anything about that part of history at all. I actually wish I'd gone to university and read history. It's a pretty interesting subject. Not the way I was taught it at school, but when you actually are there and you see it. And there's this amazing sea. And of course, most of the land round about is now under a collapsing communist rule. And the first place we went was to Georgia. And the Greek Orthodox Church, in fact the Ecumenical Patriarch, I don't think had been to Georgia for many centuries. And we went to a church there, and again, the fantastic spirituality of this happening. The people of Georgia have always been living in civil war for many, many, many hundreds of years. But they were there, the church was overflowing, as I'm told it was, even without the Ecumenical Patriarch coming. And the singing, the music, the joyous, the celebration of a sea which had been killed in the last 50 years. It only died. There were still lots and lots of fish. There were sturgeon coming out of the sea. There were anchovies, but even finally the anchovies had gone. Why? Because the great Russian agricultural machine was pouring so much nutrient, phosphate and nitrate, down into the Black Sea that it just died. No more fish. And the other real problem was the Ceausescu regime. The Danube comes down draining 1/3 of Europe, and the Ceausescu, and at the mouth of the Danube are some of the best wetlands in the world, the Plavs, enormous great areas of the common reed. Same thing that we had stretching from here all the way across the Fen country not that long ago. But the Ceausescu regime had started with advice from agriculturalists, from university agriculturalists. I won't say in which country, I won't even say in which county. You carbon you turn them into farmland. You build fish farms and you feed those fish with the other fish that we've got left that we're taking out. And so all of a sudden the kidneys of 1/3 of Europe were killed. Ceausescu did, bang, so the kidneys no longer filtered all the phosphate and nitrate out as that water hit the Black Sea, and the Black Sea actually died. Now the good news was that because Ceausescu's gone, and because the Russian machine has collapsed, and there aren't the big collective farms anymore, and they can't afford the phosphate and nitrate, the sea is living again. So I went round, I made a film, I told the story of another parable, the loaves and the fishes. And at the end I stood on the quayside in Istanbul, and there were thousands of tons of anchovies pouring out onto the quayside, simply because we've given the Black Sea a breathing space by not doing all the things we have been doing for the last 50 years. See, the Second World War ended, and we started the war on the earth. The Second World War ended with the surfeit of internal combustion engines, of bulldozers and of chainsaws, and the surfeit of organophosphates. And since then we have seen not just this world but the whole of the world begin to go very, very much downhill as far as being balanced natural landscape. Now for the good news. The most exciting thing I did last year was to go to Western Australia, to the wheat belt. I've been working out there for the last 10 years. We're planting 3 billion trees in the wheat belt, not million, 3 billion. And last year, in one day, we planted 1 million trees. Now, I remember the British Trust of Conservation volunteers getting very excited when we planted 1 million trees. I planted it with about 11 mares up on the Pennines, and it taken us 3 years to do that. There's only 1.5 million people in Western Australia. We planted 1 million trees in a day. We've got giant machines, all the kids sit on them, popping the trees in, absolutely fantastic. But 10 years ago, we went to, well, there wasn't a community, there was 10 square kilometres of salt that had been the Lee Scrub, had been a wonderful place for wildlife, some very, very rare animals living there, but in have moved the farmers, removed the trees, and it's gone over to salt there. So 11 years production of winter wheat of it has gone. And we went back and we, working with the men of the trees, have planted trees. And we've done alley cropping, and the trees are back, and the crops are back, and the farmers are back, and the farm animals are back, and the wildlife is back. Absolutely fantastic in just 10 years. And so I went back to reopen the local village hall. And it was one of those wonderful days. It was a church fete, and everybody was out there. The food they cooked was wonderful. They produced it themselves, and we celebrated. But the main celebration was that half their village hall is now a place to teach other people how to get rid of the salt. So we're going to plant those 3 billion trees out there, and we are going to put that landscape back into working order. And that is very, very, very good news. And I stand here on the edge of East Anglia and on the edge of the Fen country. And that is being put back into working order. Because all of a sudden, people are realising that, we cannot go on just taking from the landscape. We've got to put something back. And even in the guide, I know, and both Rob and I write some pretty acerbic things about the Environment Agency, but we don't have to, we can go and grumble, can't we, Rob? We don't have to sit there in the job and actually make these things happen. But working along with the great partnership, we are seeing, I think, a change come about, because we're very frightened about that word, I'll use it again, eutrophication. Too much phosphate and too much nitrate in the water. If people ask me, what is the greatest danger in the world, I will say eutrophication. Because as soon as you enrich something, you lose diversity. Because as soon as you enrich something, some wonderful organism can grab it all up and use up all the space. Rather, I suppose, like the world, isn't it now? 365 billionaires, and they all want to be richer, and the people at the bottom fall off. Very, very recently, a conference was held in Bar, and sponsored by Sadruddin Aga Khan, who, remember, is a Muslim. And he, at the opening of this conference, reminded us that in the Quran, first of all, it says that every creature that creepeth, crawleth, swimmeth on this earth is important because of its ability to praise Allah. And it also says in the Quran that you must not have more children than you can actually support. And that, in some ways, is the best news. We come back to Indonesia, 200 million Muslims. They have the best family planning in any third world country in the world. And they are now helping them. It's very difficult when you go into another country, from a rich first world country, and try to put over the fact that they should have access to modern reproductive health care. But when you get a third world, a developing country helping them, that is very good news. But the bad news from the conference was, an American economist said that the people who had actually benefited from globalisation since 1979 was less than 1%. So less than 1% of the world has actually benefited from the globalisation which is going on. And that, I believe, is why the green renaissance is with us. Because people are turning around and they're saying, where have these things gone? In fact, one of the greatest inputs into the conservation movement now are 28 to 35-year-old young couples just have their first child, and Dad says, "Oh, it's tadpole time, I'll take you," and you can't find any tadpoles, the pond's gone. So he said, "Well, at least I'm taking you can hear skylarks singing, and skylark aren't there." And they're looking across these great fields of monoculture, and they're saying, what can we actually do? And that's what we're here to celebrate. Someone, a real farming community, turning around saying, we can have our cake and eat it. It is quite easy to put the British countryside back into working order. And as I have one of the greatest campaigners sitting in front of me, who's never afraid to say anything, I won't be afraid to say this. I think the Church of England should be leading the way, because they are immense landowners. And if they just took half their land and put it into organic farming, I and Robin Page could retire. Now, perhaps the Church of England don't want us to retire, but I think it would be a pretty good thing to see, because you can make a living out of organic farming. You make a very, very good living. And when the Common Agricultural Policy is revamped, and it's going to be revamped very soon, and we see all those subsidies disappear, organic food will all of a sudden become, yes, cheaper than the other stuff, which is already highly subsidised. So what a way. We may have a Millennium Dome down in London, but how about having organic production sweeping across the country from the heartland of the Church of England? Now, it's not going to solve all the problems, because organic production is not that 100% squeaky. It may be squeaky green, but it's not that squeaky clean. There still will be nutrients leaking away, even from a well-run organic system, into the local water. But you have the Wildlife Trust, you have the RSPB, you have all the NGOs out there. They have the money already to put at least 10,000 acres, in fact, we can probably squeeze it and say 10,000 hectares of fenland back into working order. If we put that back into working order in the right place, that will strip all those nutrients out. And I say that with my hand on my heart, because if just wiping Ceausescu and everything he stood for away and putting a little bit of the Danube Delta back into working order, we are not draining 1/3 of Europe. We are not getting the waste and the eutrophication from 1/3 of Europe. We can do it. Nature is a very, very wonderful thing. I have now for 35 years been teaching at university. And I have been teaching, yes, about evolution, but I've been teaching of the wonders of that creative part of evolution. In fact, I call it creative evolution, which allows plants to live in harmony. Which allows, well, the animals don't live in harmony with my plant, but the whole thing lives in some sort of quasi-harmony. And that we have actually got to do. And so the rural countryside, if I was 30 and not 65, I would get young Robin down there and I'd say, let's set up a new political party. It would be called the Rural Party. And I reckon we'd get an awful lot of votes. Ladies and gentlemen, let us just think for a moment of the creative power of God's own word. Until people came on the scene here in Britain, it was a pretty boring place. It was covered with woodland. And there were about 4 or 5 sorts of woodland spread across the British Isles. And you couldn't see the wood for the trees. You couldn't see the views. Down here, it must have been absolute murder moving about any distance at all. He couldn't have hopped in his motor car and driven somewhere. He would have had to cut his way through lowland, swamp, forest and car for quite a long way. And it was people, and it was the magic of people that suddenly created this biodiversity. And that biodiversity was there up until the beginning of the last war. And it's only 60 years, and we know we can wipe that 60 years out. We can grow all the food we actually need, all the food we need for the world, and we can have, yes, the skylark back. And my aim in life, I think, is that by 2020, every river in Britain has got otters back in it, and that perhaps everyone can have the pleasure of seeing the raptors flying overhead.